In the sweltering heat of Florida's summer of 1841, Magnolia Estate stood as a testament to wealth and power on the outskirts of Tallahassee. The plantation, with its imposing white columns and sprawling grounds, belonged to the Hargrove family, most notably to Eleanor Hargrove, a widow of 45 years, whose reputation preceded her wherever whispers could travel. The three-story mansion, surrounded by ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss, cast long shadows across the manicured lawn as the evening sun began its descent. Inside, the polished mahogany floors reflected the warm glow of oil lamps, while servants moved silently through the corridors, their eyes downcast, their movements efficient. Eleanor sat in her study, her steel-grey eyes focused on the financial ledgers before her. Her once auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was pulled back in a severe bun that accentuated her sharp features. Years of managing the plantation after her husband's death had hardened her face, but had done nothing to diminish her beauty. A cold, calculating beauty that inspired both admiration and fear. "Mistress," a soft voice interrupted her concentration. It belonged to Mercy, a house slave who had served Eleanor for over 20 years. "Dr. Woodward has arrived." Eleanor's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Send him in and bring us some tea." Dr. James Woodward entered moments later, medical bag in hand, his usually confident demeanor slightly diminished in Eleanor's presence. He had been attending to the Hargrove family and their slaves for 15 years, but something about Eleanor always made him uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hargrove," he greeted with a slight bow, "I came as soon as I received your message. Is it one of the field hands again?" "I know, James," Eleanor replied, gesturing for him to sit. "It's my daughter, Margaret. She's with child again." The doctor's expression faltered. "Again? But she just delivered last." 10 months ago, yes," Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp. "I'm aware of my own grandchildren, Doctor. What concerns me is her health. This will be her 5th child in 6 years. I fear for her constitution." "Doctor." Woodward nodded, his brow furrowed. "I'll examine her, but I must express my concern. This pace of childbearing is dangerous, especially given the complications she experienced last time." Eleanor's expression remained impassive. "Margaret understands her duties as a wife. The Williams name requires heirs, and my son-in-law is determined to provide them." As they spoke, a crack of thunder shook the window panes. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the plantation, promising a violent summer storm. The air grew thick with tension, both from the impending weather and the unspoken concerns that hung between the doctor and the matriarch. "There's something else," Eleanor said, lowering her voice. "I need you to examine Sarah as well." "Doctor." Woodward stiffened. Sarah was one of Eleanor's personal slaves, barely 17 years old. "Is she ill?" "She's with child," Eleanor stated matter-of-factly. "I need to know how far along. It's important for planning purposes." The doctor's discomfort visibly increased, but he knew better than to question Eleanor's requests. The Hargrove family's influence extended throughout Tallahassee and beyond. Their generous donations had built the town's church and hospital. "I'll see to both of them," he agreed reluctantly. As they finished their tea, a distant wail echoed through the house, the cry of a child in distress. Eleanor didn't flinch, but Dr. Woodward noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her teacup. "The nursery is quite full these days," she remarked with an odd pride in her voice. "The Hargrove blood must continue, Doctor, at any cost." Little did Dr. Woodward know that the true horror of Magnolia Estate had only begun to reveal itself, and that the generations born within those walls carried secrets darker than the approaching storm. The rain fell in heavy sheets by the time Dr. Woodward finished examining Margaret Williams, Eleanor's only daughter. Lightning flashed through the windows of the second-floor bedroom, briefly illuminating the pale face of the young woman who lay exhausted against silk pillows. At 24, Margaret looked a decade older, her once vibrant eyes now sunken and rimmed with dark circles, her slender frame weakened by multiple pregnancies in quick succession. "You must rest, Mrs. Williams," Dr. Woodward insisted, packing his instruments into his bag. "This pregnancy is taxing your strength considerably. I'm prescribing complete bed rest for at least the next month." Margaret's eyes darted nervously to the door, as if expecting someone to enter. "Mother won't approve," she whispered. "She says women in our family have always borne children without such indulgences." The doctor frowned. "Your mother is not my patient. You are, and if you don't rest, I fear for both you and the child." A flash of something, fear, resignation, crossed Margaret's face before she nodded weakly. The candlelight cast grotesque shadows on the floral wallpaper as another rumble of thunder shook the house. "Dr. Woodward," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm, "there's something you should know about the children." Before she could continue, the bedroom door opened, and Eleanor entered, accompanied by a stern-faced man in his 30s, Jonathan Williams, Margaret's husband and the father of her children. "What's the verdict, Doctor?" Jonathan demanded, his accent betraying his northern origins. He had moved to Florida 10 years ago, marrying into the wealthy Hargrove family and quickly adapting to the lifestyle of a southern plantation owner. "As I was explaining to Mrs. Williams, she needs complete rest. This pregnancy—" "Nonsense," Eleanor interrupted. "My daughter comes from strong stock. Women in our family have been bearing children since the founding of this territory without the luxury of bed rest. She'll be fine." Dr. Woodward bristled. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hargrove, this is a medical matter. Your daughter's body needs time to recover." Jonathan placed a possessive hand on Margaret's shoulder. "We appreciate your concern, Doctor, but we'll follow Mrs. Hargrove's guidance in family matters. The Williams line must continue." The doctor noticed how Margaret seemed to shrink beneath her husband's touch, how her eyes lowered immediately. Something was deeply wrong in this household, something beyond the expected dynamics of a southern plantation family. "Now," Eleanor said, changing the subject abruptly, "Sarah is waiting in the servants' quarters. I'll have Mercy show you the way." Dr. Woodward reluctantly left Margaret's room, casting one last concerned glance at his patient before following Mercy down the narrow back staircase that led to the slaves' quarters. The air grew increasingly stifling as they descended, the elegant decor of the main house giving way to stark utilitarianism. Mercy led him to a small room where Sarah sat on a simple wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She couldn't have been more than 17, with dark skin that contrasted with her simple cotton dress. "Leave us," the doctor instructed Mercy, who hesitated before obeying. Once alone with Sarah, Dr. Woodward spoke gently. "Your mistress asked me to examine you. She says you're with child?" Sarah nodded wordlessly, a single tear sliding down her cheek. The examination confirmed Eleanor's statement. Sarah was approximately 4 months pregnant. As the doctor noted his findings, he noticed scarring on Sarah's abdomen that suggested a previous cesarean delivery, unusual and extremely dangerous, especially for a slave. "This isn't your first child?" he asked carefully. "No, sir," Sarah whispered. "Third." "And the others?" Sarah's eyes finally met his, filled with a mixture of fear and despair. "They live in the nursery, sir, with all the others." "All the others?" Dr. Woodward repeated, confused. "The mistress keeps them all together, says they're all Hargroves one way or another." The doctor's blood ran cold as the implications of Sarah's words became clear. The nursery he had glimpsed on previous visits, filled with children of various ages and shades of skin, all related somehow to Eleanor Hargrove. As he left Sarah's room, a commotion from the main house drew his attention. Raised voices, running feet, and then a scream that chilled him despite the humid air. "The young master!" Mercy cried as she rushed past. "He's fallen down the stairs!" Dr. Woodward hurried back to the main house, his medical bag clutched tightly in his hand. The storm outside intensified, matching the growing sense of dread that filled him. Something unnatural was happening at Magnolia Estate, something that went beyond the already troubling norms of plantation life in 1841 Florida. And Eleanor Hargrove was at the center of it all. Dr. Woodward rushed up the grand staircase, medical bag in hand, following the sounds of distress that echoed through the mansion. At the top of the stairs, a small crowd had gathered around a crumpled form, a boy of about 9 years, his blonde hair matted with blood from a gash on his forehead. "Make way," the doctor commanded, kneeling beside the child. The boy's pulse was steady, but he remained unconscious, his breathing shallow. "What happened?" Dr. Woodward demanded, looking up at the frightened faces surrounding him. "He was running along the hallway," explained a trembling house slave named Daniel. "Miss Eleanor has forbidden the children from leaving the East Wing, but Master Thomas often sneaks out when—" "That's quite enough, Daniel." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face composed despite the emergency. "Doctor, please tend to my grandson. Everyone else, return to your duties immediately." The servants scattered, leaving only Eleanor, Dr. Woodward, and the injured child in the hallway. As the doctor cleaned and stitched the wound, he noticed Eleanor watching with an unsettling detachment. "He'll need rest and monitoring," Dr. Woodward explained as he finished bandaging the boy's head. "There could be internal injuries I can't detect. Someone should stay with him through the night." "I'll have him moved to the nursery," Eleanor replied. "The nursemaids can watch over him." "The nursery?" The doctor frowned. "A room full of infants and young children is hardly the place for a boy recovering from a serious injury." Eleanor's expression hardened. "You misunderstand our arrangements, Doctor. The nursery at Magnolia Estate is extensive." Curiosity overcame the doctor's usual professional distance. "I'd like to see this nursery, Mrs. Hargrove, to ensure it's suitable for Thomas's recovery." A flash of reluctance crossed Eleanor's face before she nodded curtly. "Very well. Once the boy is stable enough to move, I'll show you myself." An hour later, with Thomas conscious but groggy, 2 male slaves carefully carried the boy on a stretcher, following Eleanor down a long corridor in the East Wing that Dr. Woodward had never been permitted to enter before. They passed several closed doors before reaching a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. Eleanor produced a key from her pocket and unlocked them. "Welcome to the future of the Hargrove legacy, Doctor." What lay beyond those doors defied the doctor's expectations entirely. Instead of a single room, he found himself in what amounted to an entire section of the house dedicated to children, at least 20 of them, ranging from infants to adolescents. Some played quietly on the floor of a central common area, while others read books or worked on lessons under the watchful eye of several nursemaids, both white and black. Most disturbing of all was the variety among the children themselves. While some clearly resembled Eleanor's family with their auburn hair and light eyes, others had darker complexions that suggested mixed parentage. Yet they all wore similar clothing of fine quality and seemed to be receiving equal education and care, an arrangement virtually unheard of in 1841 Florida. "Mrs. Hargrove," the doctor began carefully, "I don't understand. Are all these children—" "Hargroves," Eleanor finished for him. "Every single one of them carries our blood, one way or another." She led him through the common area into a smaller room with several beds, where Thomas was placed on an empty one. A young nursemaid immediately came to attend to him. "5 generations of Hargroves live under this roof, Doctor," Eleanor continued, her voice filled with an unsettling pride. "My mother, myself, my daughter, her children, and now their children beginning to arrive as well." Dr. Woodward's medical mind calculated quickly. "That's impossible. Margaret's oldest can't be more than 6 years old." Eleanor smiled coldly. "I wasn't referring only to Margaret's line." As they walked back through the common area, Eleanor pointed out various children with disturbing precision. "That one there, with the book, he's Sarah's first, though his father was my late son Robert." The twins by the window are from Lucinda, who used to serve as our cook before she died in childbirth. Their father was Jonathan before he married Margaret. The doctor felt ill as the full implication of Eleanor's words sank in. "You're breeding them," he whispered, horrified. "Your own family, your slaves." "I'm preserving and strengthening the Hargrove bloodline," Eleanor corrected sharply. "Do you have any idea how many prominent families have been ruined by dilution of their blood through unsuitable marriages? I've found a solution." Outside, lightning flashed violently, briefly illuminating the unnaturally calm faces of the children who seemed to understand their place in Eleanor's grand design without fully comprehending its horror. "This is monstrous," Dr. Woodward said, struggling to maintain his composure. "What you're doing is ensuring our family's prosperity for generations to come," Eleanor interrupted. "These children will inherit wealth, education, and the strongest aspects of the Hargrove Constitution. Some will remain here to continue our work, others will be sent out into the world to extend our influence." As they spoke, Dr. Woodward noticed an elderly woman watching from a rocking chair in the corner. Eleanor's mother, he presumed, still alive, and witnessing the fulfillment of what must have been a multi-generational plan. "You've seen enough for today," Eleanor declared, guiding him firmly toward the exit. "Thomas will recover well here. I'll expect you to return in a few days to check on both him and Margaret." As they reached the double doors, a small girl with auburn hair tugged at Eleanor's skirt. "Grandmother," she said in a sweet voice that chilled the doctor to his core, "is it time for the new babies to join us yet?" Eleanor patted the child's head with genuine affection. "Soon, Caroline, very soon." The doctor left Magnolia Estate that night with his medical bag in hand and horror in his heart, knowing he had glimpsed only the surface of the darkness that Eleanor Hargrove had cultivated within those walls, a darkness that had been growing for decades and would continue to spread unless someone intervened. The following week brought relentless rain to Tallahassee, turning roads into muddy rivers and keeping most residents indoors. For Dr. Woodward, however, the weather provided no excuse to avoid his duties, especially now that he harbored grave concerns about Magnolia Estate. In the privacy of his modest home office, the doctor pored over his patient records by lamplight, searching for patterns he might have missed. The Hargrove family and their slaves had been under his care for 15 years, yet he'd never connected the troubling pieces until now. "James?" His wife, Mary, entered with a cup of tea. "You've been distracted since returning from the Hargrove plantation. What troubles you?" Dr. Woodward hesitated. Mary was a kind, intelligent woman whose judgment he trusted, but the horrors he suspected at Magnolia Estate were almost too terrible to voice. "I believe Eleanor Hargrove is conducting a breeding program," he finally said, his voice low despite their privacy. "Using her own family members and their slaves to create generations of children with Hargrove blood." Mary's face paled as she set down the teacup with trembling hands. "Surely you're mistaken, even for a woman as cold as Eleanor." "I've delivered too many babies in that house not to have noticed sooner," he interrupted, self-reproach evident in his voice. "Children of various complexions, all raised together in a secluded wing. Eleanor speaks of them as investments, as the future of the Hargrove legacy." "What will you do?" Mary asked, fear evident in her eyes. The Hargroves were powerful. Accusing them of such depravity would be dangerous, perhaps fatal. "I need evidence," the doctor replied. "Something concrete that could persuade the authorities to investigate." 3 days later, Dr. Woodward returned to Magnolia Estate, ostensibly to check on both Thomas's recovery and Margaret's pregnancy. The boy was healing well, though the doctor noted with concern how subdued he seemed, almost afraid, when Eleanor entered the nursery to observe the examination. After seeing Thomas, the doctor was escorted to Margaret's bedroom. She appeared even weaker than before, her breathing labored, despite the supposed rest she'd been getting. "Mrs. Williams," he said gently, Have you been following my instructions? Complete bed rest is essential in your condition. Margaret's eyes darted nervously to the door before she whispered, Mother has had me sitting with her in the study every afternoon. She says inactivity breeds weakness of character. Dr. Woodward's frustration mounted. Your health and that of your unborn child are at risk. I must insist. It doesn't matter, Margaret interrupted with unexpected bitterness. Nothing matters except continuing the line. That's all we're good for here. Vessels and seeds. The doctor leaned closer, lowering his voice. Mrs. Williams, if you're being mistreated or forced into anything against your will, there are ways I might help. Margaret's laugh held no humor. Help? No one can help us. Mother has ensured that. Have you seen her ledger yet, Doctor? The one she keeps locked in the mahogany box on her desk? That would tell you everything. Before he could press further, the door opened and Eleanor entered, her timing as impeccable as always. How is my daughter today, Doctor? Declining, he replied bluntly. She needs genuine rest, not appearances in your study. Eleanor's expression remained impassive. I'll take your professional opinion under advisement. Now I believe you wanted to check on Sarah as well. The doctor nodded, seeing an opportunity. Yes, and I'd like to speak with you privately afterward. There are some concerning patterns in the health of your household that we must discuss. Something flickered behind Eleanor's eyes. Caution, perhaps, or calculation. Very well. Meet me in my study after you've seen Sarah. The examination of the young slave revealed that her pregnancy was progressing normally, though Dr. Woodward noted with concern the distant, resigned expression on Sarah's face, the look of someone who had accepted her fate as inevitable. Afterward, he made his way to Eleanor's study, his mind racing with how he might gain access to the ledger Margaret had mentioned. Luck, it seemed, was on his side. As he approached the study, he heard Eleanor's voice down the hallway, engaged in what sounded like a heated discussion with her son-in-law. The study door stood ajar. Dr. Woodward slipped inside, his heart pounding. The mahogany box sat prominently on the desk, locked as Margaret had said. Using a small surgical tool from his bag, he managed to spring the simple lock. Plantation owners rarely expected theft from within their own homes. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, meticulously maintained in Eleanor's precise handwriting. What the doctor found within its pages confirmed his worst fears and revealed horrors he hadn't even imagined. The ledger contained genealogical charts spanning 3 generations, with notes on physical characteristics, intelligence, and temperament of each breeding pair and their resulting offspring. Eleanor had been documenting lineages, planning pairings, and assessing outcomes as if managing livestock rather than human beings. Most disturbing were her clinical notes about culling those born with undesirable traits and sequestering potential breeders for optimal development. Entries about Margaret revealed that her marriage to Jonathan had been arranged specifically because of his superior physical attributes and manageable temperament. Eleanor had selected him as breeding stock for her own daughter. The sound of approaching footsteps jolted the doctor from his horrified reading. He quickly copied several of the most damning pages, returned the ledger to its box, and managed to lock it just as Eleanor entered the study. "Doctor," she said coolly, "I apologize for keeping you waiting." "No apology necessary," he replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I was just gathering my thoughts on the health situation here." Their conversation that followed was a careful dance, the doctor raising general concerns about constitutional weaknesses appearing in the children, while Eleanor deflected with practiced ease. All the while, the copied pages burned in his pocket like hot coals, evidence of atrocities being committed under the veneer of Southern gentility. As Dr. Woodward prepared to leave Magnolia Estate, thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm approaching. Looking up at the imposing house, he realized that the horror wasn't just in what Eleanor had already done, but in what she was creating, a twisted dynasty built on exploitation and cruelty, designed to perpetuate itself for generations to come. The true matriarch of Tallahassee was not simply a wealthy widow with unusual ideas about family legacy. She was the architect of a living nightmare, one the doctor was now determined to end. The next morning, Dr. Woodward woke with renewed purpose. The copied pages from Eleanor's ledger were hidden in a hollowed-out medical text in his office, but their contents haunted his thoughts. He needed more evidence, something that would compel immediate action from authorities who might otherwise be reluctant to move against the powerful Hargrove family. Opportunity arrived in the form of a message delivered by Daniel, one of the Hargrove house slaves. "Miss Eleanor requests your immediate presence at Magnolia Estate. There's been an accident in the kitchen." Within the hour, Dr. Woodward was following Daniel through the servants' entrance of the plantation house. The air was thick with the scent of burned flesh and the sound of pained whimpering. In the kitchen, a young slave woman named Bessie sat trembling on a wooden chair, cradling her badly scalded arm while the cook applied a cloth soaked in cool water. "What happened?" the doctor asked, kneeling to examine the injury. "Pot of boiling water fell," Bessie whispered, though her eyes darted nervously toward the doorway where Eleanor now stood, watching. The burn was severe, but not life-threatening. As Dr. Woodward treated the wound, applying salve and clean bandages from his bag, he noticed something odd about Bessie's other arm, a series of small, regular scars that looked suspiciously like surgical incisions. "She'll need the bandages changed daily," he instructed the cook. "Keep the wound clean and continue applying this salve. If you notice any signs of infection—" "We know how to care for our people, Doctor," Eleanor interrupted. "Daniel will show Bessie back to her quarters. I'd like a word with you in my study." As they walked through the house, Dr. Woodward seized the rare opportunity to be alone with Eleanor. Those scars on Bessie's arm, they looked like bloodletting marks, but not like any I've performed. Eleanor's pace didn't falter. "Bessie has a condition that requires regular bloodletting. One of my other physicians attends to it." "Other physicians?" The doctor's suspicion deepened. "I wasn't aware you consulted anyone else for your household." They reached the study, and Eleanor closed the door firmly behind them. "There are aspects of running Magnolia Estate that require specialized expertise, Doctor. Expertise that falls outside your conventional medical practice." She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, unwilling to cede even that small psychological advantage. "Mrs. Hargrove, as the physician responsible for this household's health, I need to know about any medical procedures being performed." Eleanor's smile was cold. "Your concern is noted but unnecessary. Now regarding Margaret," a cry from somewhere beneath their feet interrupted her. It was faint but unmistakable, a sound of pain quickly muffled. Dr. Woodward's eyes narrowed. "What was that?" "The wind," Eleanor replied too quickly. "These old houses make all manner of sounds during storms." But there was no storm today. The sky outside was clear, the air still. "Mrs. Hargrove," he pressed, "as a doctor sworn to alleviate suffering, I insist on knowing what's happening in this house." Something in Eleanor's expression shifted, the mask of southern gentility slipping to reveal something harder, more calculating. "Very well, Doctor. Perhaps it's time you understood the full scope of the Hargrove legacy. Follow me." She led him out of the study and down a narrow corridor to what appeared to be a pantry. Moving aside several sacks of flour, she revealed a trap door in the floor, secured with an iron lock. Eleanor produced a key from her pocket and opened it, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. "After you," she said, lighting an oil lamp and handing it to him. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended into a cellar that extended far beyond what the doctor would have expected, a series of underground rooms that appeared to have been excavated well beyond the foundation of the house. The air grew increasingly damp and cold as they proceeded, the lamplight casting grotesque shadows on the rough stone walls. They passed a room filled with shelves of glass jars containing what looked disturbingly like preserved human specimens, organs and tissues suspended in cloudy liquid. "My grandfather began our collection," Eleanor explained with unsettling pride. "He was fascinated by the differences between races, by the potential for selective improvement of human bloodlines. My father continued his work and I have expanded it." They continued to a room that resembled a surgical theatre, complete with a table, straps, and an array of instruments that made even the doctor's experienced stomach turn. Dark stains on the floor spoke of procedures performed without the benefit of proper sanitation or humane consideration. "This is where we conduct our more innovative procedures," Eleanor said. "Transplantations, transfusions, examinations of living tissue responses." "This is butchery, not medicine," Dr. Woodward replied, horror evident in his voice. "What you're describing violates every principle of ethical practice." Eleanor waved his objection away. "Ethics evolve, Doctor. A century from now, our work will be recognized as visionary. We're creating a superior lineage, one that combines the strongest attributes of all bloodlines while purifying them of weaknesses." The sound they'd heard earlier came again, clearer now, from behind a heavy wooden door at the end of the underground corridor. Eleanor hesitated before it. "Some subjects require isolation during the recovery process," she said. "Their reactions can be distressing to others." Against his better judgment, driven by a need to document every horror, Dr. Woodward stepped forward and opened the door before Eleanor could stop him. The lamplight revealed a nightmare scene. 3 young women, 2 slaves, and one who appeared to be of mixed race, chained to the walls of a small chamber. All showed signs of recent surgical procedures, their abdomens bandaged and stained with blood. "My God," the doctor whispered. "What have you done to them?" "Ensured the continuation of our work," Eleanor replied calmly. "These 3 are carrying the next generation of our specialized bloodline. We've made certain modifications to improve the chances of successful development." One of the women, barely more than a girl, looked up at the doctor with pleading eyes. "Help us," she whispered, her voice cracked from screaming. "Please." Dr. Woodward turned to Eleanor, no longer bothering to hide his revulsion. "This ends now. These women need immediate medical attention and release from this chamber of horrors." Eleanor's expression hardened. "I think not, Doctor. You see, I've shown you these things because I believe a man of your intelligence and skill could be an asset to our project. With your surgical expertise, we could advance our work considerably." "You're insane if you think I would participate in this barbarism," he spat. "Insanity is a convenient label for visionaries whose work others fail to comprehend," Eleanor replied coldly. "Consider carefully, Doctor. The Hargrove influence extends throughout Florida and beyond. No one would believe your accusations. Not against us, but with us, you could be part of something truly remarkable." In that moment, Dr. Woodward realized the full extent of his danger. Eleanor had not shown him these horrors as a gesture of trust, but as a test, and his reaction had already sealed his fate. No one who had seen the true nature of Magnolia Estate could be allowed to leave if they were not committed to its twisted purpose. "I'll need time to consider your offer," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "This is all quite overwhelming." Eleanor studied his face, her grey eyes calculating. "Of course, I understand. Return tomorrow evening with your answer. In the meantime, I trust you'll maintain absolute discretion about our discussion." As they ascended back to the main house, Dr. Woodward knew with certainty that he would not live to see another sunset if he returned to Magnolia Estate. The Hargrove matriarch had revealed her true nature, a monster cloaked in the veneer of Southern aristocracy, creating an unspeakable legacy that had to be stopped, no matter the cost. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed on Dr. Woodward as he rode back to town, his medical bag clutched tightly as if it contained the evidence of Eleanor's atrocities rather than simply his instruments and medicines. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, yet he felt chilled to the bone. Tallahassee in 1841 was a small but growing community where reputation and social standing dictated nearly every aspect of life. The Hargroves had been among its founding families, their wealth and influence touching every institution from the church to the courthouse. How could he expose their horrors without risking not only his own life, but possibly those of his wife and children? As he passed the town square, the doctor noticed Sheriff Thomas Bailey emerging from his office. An idea formed in his mind. Bailey was a reasonable man who had moved to Florida from Pennsylvania only a few years ago. Perhaps he would be less entangled in the Hargroves' web of influence. "Sheriff," Dr. Woodward called, dismounting his horse. "Might I have a word with you in private?" Bailey, a stocky man with a no-nonsense demeanor, nodded. "Of course, Doctor. Step into my office." Inside the small, sparse room that served as Tallahassee's law enforcement headquarters, Dr. Woodward carefully closed the door before speaking. "What I'm about to tell you involves one of the most prominent families in this county," he began, keeping his voice low. "I require your absolute discretion and, if my suspicions are correct, your official intervention." Over the next 20 minutes, the doctor outlined what he had discovered at Magnolia Estate, the breeding program, the cellar laboratory, the imprisoned women, and Eleanor's meticulous documentation of it all. He produced the copied pages from her ledger, spreading them on Bailey's desk as evidence. The sheriff's expression grew increasingly troubled as he listened, but when Dr. Woodward finished, Bailey's response was not what he had hoped for. "These are serious accusations, Doctor," Bailey said, carefully folding the copied pages and returning them. "But I must advise caution. The Hargroves have been pillars of this community since before Florida was even a territory. Their contributions to—" "Did you hear what I said?" Dr. Woodward interrupted, incredulous. "They're committing atrocities, treating human beings like livestock, performing brutal experiments, holding women captive for breeding." Bailey held up a placating hand. "I heard you, but consider the practical realities. Half the town's businesses rely on Hargrove investments. The courthouse itself was built with their money. And the practices you describe regarding their slaves, while perhaps unusually systematic, are not technically illegal in Florida. This goes far beyond the ordinary evils of slavery," the doctor insisted. "Eleanor is experimenting on people, including her own family members." The sheriff sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I'm not dismissing your concerns entirely, but these kinds of accusations require extraordinary proof, especially against a family like the Hargroves. What would you have me do? March up to Magnolia Estate with my deputy and demand to search their home based on some copied pages that could have been written by anyone?" Dr. Woodward felt a creeping sense of dread. "You knew, didn't you? Or at least suspected. How many others in town are aware of what goes on there?" Bailey's silence was answer enough. "My God," the doctor whispered. "The whole town is complicit." "Not complicit," Bailey corrected. "Simply pragmatic. Tallahassee needs the Hargroves. Their cotton exports are the backbone of our economy. Their political connections in Washington ensure our territorial interests are represented. And yes, occasionally there are rumors about unusual practices or disappearances associated with their plantation, but nothing that can be proven." Dr. Woodward stood abruptly. "And nothing that will be proven if no one is willing to investigate. I see I've wasted my time here." As he reached for the door, Bailey's voice stopped him. "Doctor, a word of advice. Eleanor Hargrove has buried 3 husbands and countless others who posed threats to her family's interests. Whatever you're planning, reconsider, for your family's sake, if not your own." The warning hung in the air between them, neither threat nor endorsement, but a simple statement of fact. "Doctor." Woodward left without another word, his mind racing with the implications of what the sheriff had revealed. As he walked through town toward his home office, the doctor began to notice details he'd overlooked before. How the Hargrove name appeared on buildings throughout Tallahassee, how conversations quieted when he passed, how the town itself seemed to exist in the shadow of Magnolia Estate. He reached his office and locked the door behind him, sinking into his chair with a growing sense of isolation. If the sheriff wouldn't help, who would? The territorial governor was a known associate of the Hargroves. The local newspaper editor owed his printing press to Eleanor's late husband. Even the church pastor had officiated at multiple Hargrove weddings and baptized their children. As evening fell, Mary entered his office with a lamp and a worried expression. "James, you missed supper. The children were asking for you." Dr. Woodward looked up at his wife, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they all were. "Mary, I need you to listen carefully. Tomorrow morning I want you to take the children and visit your sister in Savannah. Tell no one where you're going, and take only what you can carry inconspicuously." Mary's face paled. "James, what have you done?" "What I had to," he replied grimly. "I've seen things at Magnolia Estate. Horrors beyond imagination. I tried to get Sheriff Bailey's help, but it seems the Hargroves' influence runs too deep." "So you're sending us away while you do what exactly?" Mary demanded, fear making her voice sharp. The doctor pulled out a sheet of paper and began writing rapidly. "I'm going to document everything I've witnessed with names, dates, and locations. Then I'm going to ensure these documents reach people who cannot be bought or intimidated by the Hargroves. Federal authorities, newspapers in the North, medical journals. And then..." He looked up at his wife, his expression resolute. "And then I'm going to return to Magnolia Estate one last time to free those poor souls in the cellar." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "You'll be killed." "Perhaps," he acknowledged, "but I took an oath to do no harm. Keeping silent about what I've seen would violate that oath as surely as if I wielded Eleanor's surgical instruments myself." As Mary reluctantly agreed to his plan, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved away from their window. Daniel, the Hargrove house slave who had delivered the message about Bessie's burn. He melted into the gathering darkness, making his way quickly back toward Magnolia Estate with information that would seal the doctor's fate. Inside the grand plantation house, Eleanor Hargrove sat at her desk, reviewing her ledger by lamplight, when a soft knock came at the study door. "Enter," she commanded. Daniel slipped inside, his eyes downcast as was expected, but his voice urgent. "Mistress, I have news about Dr. Woodward." Eleanor's pen paused above the page. "Speak." "He went to the sheriff this afternoon," Daniel reported. "And now he's planning to send his family away and gather evidence against you. He intends to return here tomorrow night." A cold smile spread across Eleanor's face as she made a new entry in her ledger. "Thank you, Daniel. You've proven your value once again." "Yes, mistress," he replied, backing toward the door. "One more thing," Eleanor called after him. "Tell Jonathan to prepare the special room in the cellar. It seems we'll have a new subject to study tomorrow evening, one with considerable medical expertise." As Daniel closed the door behind him, Eleanor returned to her ledger, adding a final note beside Dr. Woodward's name. "Potential acquisition of surgical knowledge. Preserve brain and hands for study." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance as another summer storm approached Tallahassee, promising to wash away any evidence of what would transpire at Magnolia Estate the following night. The following day dawned hot and humid, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and the distant promise of rain. Dr. Woodward watched from his office window as Mary and their two children boarded the morning stagecoach bound for Savannah, his heart heavy with the possibility that he might never see them again. Once the coach disappeared from view, he turned back to his desk where multiple copies of his detailed account lay drying, a comprehensive documentation of the horrors at Magnolia Estate. He had worked through the night, writing until his hand cramped, recording everything from the contents of Eleanor's ledger to the precise layout of the underground chambers. 3 copies were already sealed and addressed to strategic recipients. A federal judge in Washington who had once been his classmate at medical school, the editor of a prominent medical journal in Philadelphia, and an abolitionist newspaper in Boston. These would be dispatched on the afternoon mail coach. But before then, he had one more crucial task. He needed allies for tonight's rescue attempt, people who might be willing to risk everything to end the Hargrove reign of terror. His first stop was the small cabin where Jeremiah Johnson, a free black man, operated his blacksmith shop at the edge of town. Jeremiah had earned his freedom 20 years ago and had since established himself as a respected craftsman, though his status remained precarious in the slave-holding South. "Doctor?" Jeremiah greeted him cautiously as he entered the sweltering forge. "What brings you here today?" Dr. Woodward closed the door firmly behind him. "I need your help, Jeremiah. It involves great risk, but also the chance to save innocent lives." Over the next half hour, the doctor outlined what he had discovered at Magnolia Estate, focusing particularly on the imprisoned women in the cellar. Jeremiah's expression darkened as he listened, his powerful hands tightening around the hammer he held. "I've heard whispers," the blacksmith admitted when the doctor finished. "Slaves who escaped from Hargrove land told stories, but most dismissed them as fantasy or madness. To think it was true all along." "Will you help me?" Dr. Woodward pressed. "I need someone who understands locks and chains." Jeremiah nodded grimly. "My brother is still enslaved on the Wilson plantation. If someone like Eleanor Hargrove continues her experiments, who knows how far such practices might spread? I'll help you, Doctor." His next stop was less successful. Pastor Thomas Evans of Tallahassee's First Baptist Church listened to his abbreviated account with increasing discomfort before firmly showing him the door. "These are dangerous accusations, Doctor," the pastor said, glancing nervously toward the church where Eleanor Hargrove's donation plaque hung prominently. "I suggest you pray for guidance before pursuing this matter further." By midday, Dr. Woodward had secured only 2 additional allies. Abigail Morrison, a widowed midwife who had long harbored suspicions about the unusual number of difficult births associated with Magnolia Estate, and Samuel Washington, a former slave who had purchased his freedom and now operated a small livery stable where they could obtain horses for their escape. As the afternoon mail coach departed, carrying his sealed testimonies, the doctor felt the weight of time pressing down upon him. Eleanor would be expecting him this evening. His absence would immediately arouse suspicion. Their plan was simple, but dangerous. Dr. Woodward would arrive at Magnolia Estate as expected, supposedly to give his answer to Eleanor's proposition. Meanwhile, Jeremiah, Abigail, and Samuel would approach from the rear of the property where the slave quarters provided cover. Using the doctor's detailed map of the cellar, they would rendezvous at the underground chamber, free the imprisoned women, and escape through the surrounding woods to Samuel's waiting wagon. As dusk approached, Dr. Woodward packed his medical bag with supplies that might be needed for the injured women: laudanum for pain, clean bandages, surgical tools that could double as lockpicks. His hand hesitated over the small pistol he kept in his desk drawer before finally taking it and tucking it into his coat pocket. The weight of it felt foreign and terrible, a last resort he prayed he wouldn't need. The ride to Magnolia Estate seemed both interminable and too brief. The setting sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds as Dr. Woodward approached the imposing house, its white columns now appearing to him like the bars of a magnificent cage. Daniel met him at the front steps, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Eleanor is waiting for you in her study, Doctor." As he followed the slave through the now familiar corridors, Dr. Woodward noted with growing unease the unusual stillness of the house. No children's voices echoed from the nursery wing, no servants bustled about with evening preparations. Even the typical sounds of a large plantation at dusk, distant singing from the slave quarters, kitchen noises, the creak of rocking chairs on the veranda, were absent. Eleanor rose from her desk as he entered the study, her steel-grey eyes evaluating him coldly. "Dr. Woodward, you've come to a decision regarding my offer, I presume." "I have," he replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. "Your work is unprecedented. I would like to understand more about your methods before committing myself fully." A thin smile spread across Eleanor's face. "I thought you might. Intellectual curiosity is a quality I value, Doctor. Shall we proceed to the cellar for a more thorough demonstration?" This was exactly what he had hoped for, a direct path to the imprisoned women. Yet something in Eleanor's manner set alarm bells ringing in his mind. She seemed too confident, too prepared for his response. As they descended into the underground chambers, Dr. Woodward glanced at his pocket watch. Jeremiah and the others should be approaching the rear of the property now. Timing would be crucial. The damp chill of the cellar enveloped them as they reached the bottom of the stairs. Eleanor led him past the room of preserved specimens toward the surgical theatre, speaking as they walked. "You'll be particularly interested in our latest advancement," she said conversationally. "We've discovered that certain combinations of bloodlines produce offspring with remarkable resilience to disease. By selectively breeding these lines, we're creating children who may never suffer from the fevers and ailments that plague ordinary humans." They reached the surgical theatre, but instead of continuing toward the chamber where the women had been imprisoned, Eleanor stopped. "Before we proceed further, I should introduce you to my associate. He's been most eager to discuss surgical techniques with a physician of your caliber." From the shadows stepped Jonathan Williams, Eleanor's son-in-law, wearing a blood-stained apron and carrying what appeared to be surgical tools. Behind him, Dr. Woodward could now see that the operating table was prepared, with restraints open and waiting. "I don't understand," the doctor said, though the terrible truth was already dawning on him. "Where are the women I saw yesterday?" "Relocated," Eleanor replied simply. "We couldn't risk them being disturbed during tonight's procedure." "And what procedure would that be?" he asked, his hand inching toward the pistol in his pocket. Eleanor's smile turned predatory. "The extraction and preservation of specialized knowledge, Doctor. Yours, to be precise." Before he could react, a heavy blow struck the back of his head. As consciousness faded, Dr. Woodward caught a glimpse of Daniel standing behind him, an iron rod in hand and remorse in his eyes. "Excellent timing," he heard Eleanor say as darkness closed in. "Prepare him for the procedure." "I want his brain examined while it's still functioning. We need to understand what makes a medical mind like his so exceptional." The doctor's last thought before unconsciousness claimed him was of Jeremiah, Abigail, and Samuel, walking into a trap that had been laid for them all. For Eleanor had known their plan from the beginning, and Magnolia Estate's horrors were about to claim 5 more victims. Consciousness returned to Dr. Woodward in painful fragments. First the throbbing at the back of his skull, then the biting cold of metal against his wrists and ankles, and finally the harsh glare of lamplight directly above him. He was strapped securely to the operating table in Eleanor's underground surgical theatre, his jacket and shirt removed, exposing his chest to the damp cellar air. Nearby, he could hear voices, Eleanor speaking in her precise, measured tones, and Jonathan responding with enthusiasm that turned the doctor's stomach. "Begin with a cranial examination," Eleanor was instructing. "We've never had the opportunity to study a physician's brain while it's still active. Document his responses to each stimulus." "And the others?" Jonathan asked. "The blacksmith and his accomplices?" "Secured in the holding chamber," Eleanor replied. "Their physiological responses to witnessing the doctor's procedure will provide valuable data on the effects of extreme psychological stress. Particularly the woman. I've long wondered how a midwife's observational training might influence her reactions." Dr. Woodward forced his eyes fully open, fighting against the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm him. His friends had been captured as well. The entire rescue attempt had failed before it began. "Ah, he's awake," Jonathan observed, moving into the doctor's field of vision. "Remarkable recovery time. Note that in the ledger, Mother." Eleanor appeared above him, her face a mask of clinical detachment. "Dr. Woodward, I must express my disappointment. After sharing our life's work with you, I had hoped for a more appreciative response than this crude rescue attempt. The doctor tried to speak, but his mouth was too dry, his tongue leaden. "Water," Eleanor instructed, and Daniel appeared at her side with a cup which he held reluctantly to the doctor's lips. After several painful swallows, Dr. Woodward found his voice. "How did you know?" "Daniel has been my eyes and ears in town for years," Eleanor explained, nodding toward the slave who now stood with downcast eyes near the door. "He reported your conversation with Sheriff Bailey, your meeting with the blacksmith, even your wife's departure with your children. Quite thorough, isn't he?" The doctor looked at Daniel, seeing not the betrayer he expected, but a man caught in an impossible situation, one who had survived the only way he knew how. "Now," Eleanor continued, picking up a scalpel from a nearby tray, "let's begin our examination. Jonathan, prepare the recording ledger." "Wait," Dr. Woodward gasped. "The women who were here yesterday, what have you done with them?" "They're safe," Eleanor assured him with that same terrible smile. "Their contributions to our program are far too valuable to risk. Unlike you, Doctor, they serve a continuing purpose." As Jonathan approached with an apparatus that appeared designed to hold the doctor's head immobile, a sound from above interrupted them, a door slamming, followed by rapid footsteps on the cellar stairs. "Mother!" The voice belonged to Margaret, Eleanor's daughter, who burst into the surgical theatre in a state of obvious distress. "Mother, they're here. Men from town with the sheriff. They're searching the house." Eleanor's composed facade cracked momentarily. "Impossible. On what authority?" "A federal marshal," Margaret explained breathlessly, her frightened eyes darting to Dr. Woodward on the table. "They have papers, orders to search the property for evidence of crimes against persons." Dr. Woodward felt a surge of hope. His letters, one of them must have reached a sympathetic reader with the power to act quickly. Eleanor's recovery was immediate, her mind calculating even as her plans collapsed around her. "Jonathan, secure the primary ledgers and specimens. Margaret, return upstairs and delay them. Offer refreshments, express confusion, play the role of the concerned daughter. Daniel, remain here and assist us." As Jonathan and Margaret hurried to obey, Eleanor turned back to the doctor, her expression now one of cold fury. "It seems our time together will be cut short, Dr. Woodward. A pity. There was so much we could have learned from each other." She picked up a different instrument from the tray, a long, thin blade designed for delicate incisions. "However, I cannot allow you to reveal what you've seen here." "They already know," the doctor countered, struggling against his restraints. "My letters detailed everything, the breeding program, the experiments, the imprisoned women." "It's over, Eleanor." "Perhaps this chapter," she acknowledged, testing the blade's sharpness with her thumb. "But the Hargrove legacy will continue. It always does." Before she could act, however, Daniel moved with unexpected speed, seizing a heavy iron stand and bringing it down on Jonathan's head as he returned to the room. The younger man crumpled to the floor, unconscious or worse. Eleanor whirled toward Daniel, outrage replacing her usual composure. "You dare?" "Yes, mistress, I dare," Daniel replied, his voice steadier than the doctor had ever heard it. "I've served your evil long enough." With the same determined movements, he approached the doctor and began unfastening the restraints. "The marshal is real," he explained quickly, "but so are the others. 3 men with rifles watching the main entrance. They're not with any law I recognize." "Jeremiah, Abigail, Samuel?" Dr. Woodward asked as his right hand came free. "In the holding chamber, as she said, but alive." Daniel finished with the ankle restraints and helped the doctor sit up. "We need to move quickly. The house has other defenses few know about." Eleanor had backed against the wall, watching them with a calculating gaze that suggested she was far from defeated. "Daniel, consider carefully what you're doing. After everything I've provided for you, you've provided nothing but pain." Daniel cut her off, an act that would have been unthinkable just hours before. "My wife died on that table. My children are in your nursery, not knowing who their father is. No more. Sounds of commotion echoed from above, shouting, the crack of what might have been a gunshot. The search was turning violent. "We need to free the others and find those women," Dr. Woodward insisted, pulling his shirt back on with shaking hands. "This way," Daniel directed, moving toward the door that led deeper into the underground complex. Eleanor made no move to stop them physically, but her voice followed them into the corridor. "You'll never leave these grounds alive, Doctor. The Hargrove legacy is woven into the very soil of Tallahassee. We are the town, we are this territory, and we will endure long after your bones have turned to dust." Daniel led the doctor through a maze of underground passages that extended far beyond what he had been shown previously. They reached a heavy wooden door, secured with an iron bar. "Your friends are inside," Daniel explained, lifting the bar. The door swung open to reveal Jeremiah, Abigail, and Samuel, bruised but alive, confined in a small chamber with stone walls. Their faces lit with relief at the sight of the doctor. "We thought you were dead," Abigail exclaimed as they emerged. "Nearly was," Dr. Woodward replied grimly. "But it seems help has arrived from an unexpected quarter." Daniel shook his head. "Not here yet. The men upstairs. I don't trust them. We need to find another way out." "Nay, not without the women Eleanor was keeping prisoner," the doctor insisted. "Do you know where they've been moved?" Daniel hesitated before nodding. "The north wing of the cellar, but that area is different, older. It's where the worst things happen." As they moved through the underground labyrinth, guided by Daniel's intimate knowledge of the estate's secrets, Dr. Woodward realized the full extent of the horror that had been hidden beneath the elegant plantation house. The cellar complex wasn't just a recent addition. It contained sections that appeared to date back decades, perhaps to the original construction of Magnolia Estate. Eleanor's grandmother began it, Daniel explained as they passed through a particularly ancient-looking corridor. Each generation of Hargrove women has expanded it, improved it. They've been working toward their perfect bloodline for nearly 60 years. Finally, they reached another secured door, this one bound with multiple locks. Jeremiah stepped forward, examining each mechanism with a blacksmith's expert eye. "I can open these," he declared, producing tools from his pocket that had somehow escaped discovery when he was captured. "But it will take time." "We don't have time," Samuel warned, glancing nervously back the way they had come. "Whatever's happening upstairs won't distract them forever." As Jeremiah worked on the locks, Dr. Woodward turned to Daniel. "There must be another way out of these cellars, an escape route in case of fire or collapse." Daniel nodded. "The southern tunnel. It leads to the old sugarcane processing shed 1/2 mile from the main house. But Eleanor will expect us to go that way." "Then we create a diversion," the doctor decided, "something to draw attention elsewhere while we escape." A metallic click signaled Jeremiah's success with the final lock. The heavy door swung open to reveal a chamber larger than the doctor had expected, dimly lit by a single lantern hanging from the low ceiling. Within, 5 women, 3 black, 2 of mixed race, were chained to pallets along the walls. All showed signs of Eleanor's procedures, their bodies marked with surgical scars and their abdomens distended with pregnancies in various stages. "My God," Abigail whispered, immediately moving to the nearest woman, checking her pulse and condition. Dr. Woodward followed, medical instinct overriding his horror. "Can they be moved?" "We have to try," Abigail replied, already working to remove the shackles with Jeremiah's tools. "They'll die if left here." As they worked to free the imprisoned women, a plan began to form in the doctor's mind, a desperate gamble that might allow them to escape while ensuring that Eleanor Hargrove's crimes would never be forgotten or repeated. "Daniel," he said urgently, "where does Eleanor keep her specimens, the preserved organs and records?" "The main laboratory where you were held," Daniel replied. "Why?" Dr. Woodward's expression was grim. "Because before we leave, we're going to make sure there's nothing left of the Hargrove legacy to continue." The rescue party moved as quickly as possible through the underground passages, supporting the weakened women between them. Abigail had determined that while all 5 were malnourished and traumatized, none were in immediate danger, if moved carefully. Dr. Woodward led the way with Daniel, their unlikely alliance forged in the crucible of Magnolia Estate's horrors. "The southern tunnel entrance is behind a false wall in the storage room," Daniel explained in hushed tones. "But we need to pass through the main laboratory again to reach it." The doctor nodded grimly. "Good. I need to return there anyway." "For what purpose?" Jeremiah asked from behind, where he supported a young woman who could barely walk. "To ensure that no one can continue Eleanor's work," Dr. Woodward replied. "Her records, her specimens, her instruments, all of it must be destroyed." As they approached the main laboratory, they could hear voices from the upper levels of the house, shouted commands, the heavy tread of boots, the occasional crash of furniture being overturned. The search was thorough and increasingly destructive. "Wait here," the doctor instructed the others when they reached the corridor outside the laboratory. "I'll make sure it's clear." He peered cautiously around the corner and found the laboratory empty. Jonathan still lay unconscious where Daniel had struck him down, but Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. The operating table where he had been strapped stood eerily vacant, its restraints hanging open like waiting arms. "It's clear," he called softly. "Quickly now." As the others filed into the room, Dr. Woodward began gathering Eleanor's journals and ledgers from the shelves and desk, piling them in the center of the stone floor. Jeremiah immediately understood his intention. "We're going to burn it," the blacksmith said. Not a question, but a confirmation. "Everything," the doctor affirmed. "Help me with these specimen jars." Together, they collected the grotesque collection of preserved human remains, organs, tissue samples, even what appeared to be entire fetuses suspended in cloudy liquid. Each jar joined the pile of documents on the floor. "The tunnel entrance is here," Daniel announced, pushing against a section of wall that swung open to reveal a narrow passage beyond. "Samuel, get the women through. We'll follow." As Samuel and Abigail began guiding the freed captives into the tunnel, Dr. Woodward searched the laboratory for anything flammable. He found a cabinet containing bottles of alcohol, ether, and other chemical substances used in Eleanor's experiments. "This will burn hot and fast," he said, unstopping the bottles and splashing their contents over the pile of documents and specimens. "Once it starts, we'll have very little time before the entire cellar is engulfed." Jeremiah produced a small tinderbox from his pocket, the tools of his blacksmithing trade proving useful once again. "Ready when you are, Doctor." Dr. Woodward hesitated, looking around the chamber that had been the site of so much suffering. "Wait, there's something else we need." From a locked cabinet he retrieved Eleanor's primary ledger, the master record of her breeding program and experiments. "This comes with us. Evidence." With everything prepared, the doctor nodded to Jeremiah. "Do it." The blacksmith struck flint against steel, sending sparks onto the alcohol-soaked pile. Flames leapt up immediately, blue and orange tongues that consumed the paper with frightening speed and caused the glass jars to crack and shatter from the sudden heat. "Go!" Dr. Woodward commanded, pushing Daniel and Jeremiah toward the tunnel entrance as the fire spread across the laboratory floor, igniting the wooden cabinets and tables. They had just entered the narrow passage when a voice froze them in their tracks. "Stop right there!" Eleanor Hargrove commanded from the laboratory doorway, a pistol steady in her hand. Behind her stood 2 men the doctor didn't recognize, rough-looking individuals who were clearly not law enforcement. "You think destroying my work will end it?" Eleanor laughed, the sound unnaturally calm given the flames now climbing the walls behind her. "I have duplicates of every record, samples secured elsewhere. The Hargrove legacy cannot be burned away so easily." The fire was spreading rapidly now, thick smoke beginning to fill the laboratory and spill into the tunnel entrance where they stood. "The house will burn too," Dr. Woodward warned. "Everyone upstairs, your daughter, your grandchildren, they're all in danger." "Margaret knows the evacuation procedures," Eleanor replied coolly. The nursery was cleared the moment strangers approached the house. "As for you, Doctor, I cannot allow you to leave with those women. They carry the next generation of my work." She raised the pistol, aiming directly at Dr. Woodward's chest. Before she could fire, however, a section of burning ceiling collapsed between them, sending up a wall of flames and sparks. In the confusion, Daniel pulled the doctor deeper into the tunnel. "Run!" he shouted above the roar of the growing inferno. "She'll find another way to cut us off." They fled down the narrow earthen passage, the flickering light of the fire behind them casting wild shadows on the dirt walls. Ahead, they could see Samuel and Abigail shepherding the rescued women through the tunnel. "How far to the exit?" Dr. Woodward gasped, clutching Eleanor's ledger to his chest as they ran. "Another 100 yards, Daniel replied, his voice strained. "The tunnel rises gradually toward the old sugar shed." Behind them, they could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. Eleanor and her men had found another entrance to the tunnel system. The race for freedom had become desperately real. As they approached the end of the passage, fresh air and grey daylight beckoned from an opening partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. Samuel was already helping the weakened women climb the short ladder to the surface. "Hurry!" he called down to them. "I've got the wagon waiting just beyond the trees." One by one, they emerged into what appeared to be an abandoned processing shed, its roof partially collapsed and its walls overtaken by creeping vines. Through the gaps, they could see the main house of Magnolia Estate in the distance, smoke now pouring from its lower windows as the fire spread upward from the cellar. Dr. Woodward was the last to climb the ladder, Eleanor's ledger tucked securely inside his shirt. As he reached the surface, he heard a shot ring out and felt a searing pain in his left shoulder. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees as blood blossomed across his shirt. "Got him!" a male voice called triumphantly from the tunnel below. "Help the doctor!" Daniel shouted to Jeremiah, who rushed back to support the wounded physician. "Leave me!" Dr. Woodward gasped, pressing the ledger into Jeremiah's hands. "Take this! Make sure it reaches the authorities!" "It's all here. Names, dates, procedures, everything Eleanor did. We're not leaving you," the blacksmith insisted, pulling the doctor's arm across his shoulders and half carrying him toward the waiting wagon where the others had already loaded the rescued women. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the wooden frame of the shed door just inches from their heads. Eleanor's men were emerging from the tunnel, weapons ready. What happened next would be recounted in whispered stories throughout Tallahassee for decades to come. Daniel, who had followed them out of the tunnel, turned back to face their pursuers. With a face set in grim determination, he pulled a small object from his pocket, a vial of clear liquid similar to the ones they had used to start the fire. "Go!" he shouted to Jeremiah and the doctor. "Get clear of the shed." Before anyone could react, Daniel hurled the vial back into the tunnel entrance. The resulting explosion shook the ground beneath their feet and sent the rotting structure of the sugar shed crashing down, sealing the tunnel entrance and anyone inside it under tons of burning debris. Dr. Woodward stared in horror at the collapsing building. "Daniel!" But there was no response, no movement from the rubble. Jeremiah pulled the wounded doctor toward the wagon, where Samuel already had the horses in motion. "He sacrificed himself," Jeremiah said grimly as they climbed aboard, "to give us a chance." As the wagon lurched away through the trees, Dr. Woodward looked back at Magnolia Estate. The elegant white mansion was now clearly ablaze, flames visible through the first-floor windows, dark smoke billowing into the summer sky. People swarmed the grounds like ants from a disturbed hill. Slaves, house servants, and what appeared to be law enforcement, all working to contain the rapidly spreading fire. And there, standing perfectly still amidst the chaos, a solitary figure in black watched their escaping wagon from the edge of the manicured lawn. Even at this distance, the doctor could feel Eleanor Hargrove's cold gaze following them. Her expression not of defeat but of calculation. She had survived, he realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with his bleeding wound. The Matriarch of Tallahassee had escaped the inferno, and as long as she lived, the horror might begin again. As consciousness began to fade, Dr. Woodward clutched the blood-soaked ledger to his chest. In his last moments of clarity before darkness claimed him, he made a silent vow. Eleanor Hargrove's legacy of terror would end, no matter what it cost him. 3 weeks after the fire that consumed much of Magnolia Estate, Dr. James Woodward sat on the small porch of his sister-in-law's house in Savannah, Georgia, his left arm in a sling as he slowly recovered from the gunshot wound. The humid afternoon air carried the scent of blooming jasmine, so different from the acrid smoke that had filled his lungs that fateful day. Mary sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his good arm, while their children played in the garden below. They had been reunited in Savannah a week after his escape, once he was strong enough to travel from the safe house where Jeremiah and Abigail had hidden him during the immediate aftermath. "A letter arrived today," Mary said softly, placing a sealed envelope in his lap. "From Sheriff Bailey." The doctor stared at the envelope, a mixture of anger and curiosity stirring within him. Bailey had refused to help when approached directly, yet something had prompted the search of Magnolia Estate that day. A search that, despite its suspicious nature, had provided the crucial distraction that allowed their escape. With stiff fingers, he broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "Dr. Woodward, word has reached me of your presence in Savannah. I am writing to inform you that it would be unwise to return to Tallahassee. Though the fire at Magnolia Estate has been officially ruled an accident caused by chemical stores in the cellar, there are those who suspect otherwise. Eleanor Hargrove survived, though her son-in-law, Jonathan Williams, did not. The main house was severely damaged, but stands partially intact. 3 unidentified bodies were recovered from the collapsed sugar shed, presumably the slave Daniel and 2 of Eleanor's hired men. The women you rescued have been transported north via the network that assists such escapees. They are safe, as is the blacksmith Jeremiah Johnson, who wisely left town the night of the fire. Your documentation reached appropriate parties in Washington. A quiet investigation is proceeding, though I must warn you that Eleanor retains powerful friends who are working to discredit your claims. For your family's safety, I recommend remaining away from Florida territory indefinitely. With grudging respect, Sheriff Thomas Bailey P.S. The church has taken custody of 17 children removed from Magnolia Estate. Their future remains undetermined. Dr. Woodward handed the letter to Mary, who read it with growing concern. "So it's not over," she whispered. "She's still free." "For now," the doctor replied, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "But the evidence can't be denied forever. Eleanor's ledger details decades of atrocities, names, dates, procedures. Federal authorities have copies now." Mary's expression remained troubled. "These powerful friends the sheriff mentions, how far does their influence reach?" Before he could answer, another visitor arrived at the garden gate. Abigail Morrison, the midwife who had helped them escape. She climbed the porch steps with obvious agitation. "Dr. Mrs. Woodward," she greeted them breathlessly, "I've just arrived from Charleston with news you must hear immediately." The doctor gestured to an empty chair. "What's happened?" "Eleanor Hargrove has left Tallahassee," Abigail reported. "She departed by ship last week bound for New Orleans. With her went several trunks and crates, along with her daughter Margaret and 5 of the older children from the nursery." A chill ran through Dr. Woodward, despite the warmth of the afternoon. "She's starting over." "There's more," Abigail continued grimly. "Before leaving, she liquidated much of her remaining property in Florida. The funds, nearly $50,000, were transferred to banks in New Orleans and St. Louis. "St. Louis?" Mary asked, confused. "Why there?" "It's the gateway to the West," Dr. Woodward realized, the implications settling heavily upon him. "Newly developing territories with less established law enforcement. Places where a wealthy widow might establish herself without too many questions about her past." Abigail nodded grimly. "There are rumors she purchased land near a small settlement in Missouri Territory, enough acreage for another plantation." The doctor closed his eyes momentarily, seeing again the underground chambers, the women chained to walls, Eleanor's cold smile as she prepared to cut into him. The thought of that horror beginning anew in another location was unbearable. "There's one more thing you should know," Abigail added, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "Sarah, one of the slaves who was pregnant with what Eleanor called a specialized bloodline, she wasn't among the women we rescued. She wasn't in the cellar that day." "Then where?" Mary began. "With Eleanor," Abigail confirmed. "According to the house staff who fled after the fire, Eleanor took personal charge of Sarah in the days before our rescue attempt. She was seen boarding the ship to New Orleans, heavily pregnant and heavily guarded." Dr. Woodward stood abruptly, ignoring the pain that shot through his wounded shoulder. "Then we have no choice. We must follow her." Mary rose beside him, taking his hand. "James, you can't be serious. The sheriff's letter specifically warned against—" "I know the dangers," he interrupted gently. "But consider what's at stake. The women we rescued were only a fraction of Eleanor's victims over the decades. How many more will suffer if she establishes a new Magnolia estate in the West? The authorities may eventually act on the evidence we provided, but bureaucracy moves slowly. By then, Eleanor could have an entire new generation of her specialized bloodlines underway." Abigail watched them with concern. "What do you propose, Doctor?" "Not revenge," he clarified, seeing the worry in both women's eyes. "Justice and prevention. We follow Eleanor to Missouri, not to confront her directly, but to ensure the local authorities there know exactly who has moved into their territory. We bring copies of her ledger, testimonies from the women we rescued, everything needed to prevent her from establishing another chamber of horrors." Mary's expression remained troubled, but a new resolve appeared in her eyes. "The children," she said softly. "All those children in the nursery wing, now in the church's care. What becomes of them?" "Most will likely be separated and sent to orphanages," Abigail replied sadly. "Those with visibly mixed heritage face particularly uncertain futures in the South." Dr. Woodward exchanged a significant look with his wife, a silent understanding passing between them. They had discussed expanding their family before the Magnolia estate horrors began, plans interrupted by the chaos that followed. "Perhaps," Mary suggested carefully, "we might offer homes to some of them, not just us, but others who understand their situation. Jeremiah mentioned his brother recently purchased his freedom. Abigail, you have room in your home now that your daughters are married." "It wouldn't be simple," the doctor cautioned. "These children have experienced trauma we can scarcely imagine. And those who bear the Hargrove features might attract unwanted attention if Eleanor ever learned of their whereabouts." "Nothing worthwhile is simple," Mary replied with quiet determination. "But I refuse to allow Eleanor's legacy to be one solely of horror. Those children deserve more than to be scattered to orphanages where no one understands what they've endured." As they spoke, a rider appeared at the garden gate, a young black man whom Dr. Woodward recognized as Samuel Washington's nephew. He carried a small package wrapped in oilcloth. "Dr. Woodward," the young man called up to the porch, "my uncle sent this for you. Said it was urgent you receive it today." The doctor descended the steps, accepting the package with a nod of thanks. Back on the porch, he carefully unwrapped the oilcloth to reveal a small leather-bound journal and a folded letter. The letter, in Samuel's careful handwriting, explained the journal's significance. "This belonged to Daniel. He entrusted it to me months ago, saying if anything happened to him, it should reach you. It contains locations of other Hargrove properties and names of children fathered by the Hargrove men with slaves on neighboring plantations over 3 generations. Daniel believed Eleanor has been collecting these children through purchases and trades for years, expanding her breeding program beyond Magnolia Estate. There's also a map marking what he called secondary sites, places where Eleanor conducted experiments considered too risky for the main estate. He died so we could escape, Doctor. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain." Dr. Woodward's hands trembled slightly as he opened the journal. Inside, in a meticulous hand that belied Daniel's limited formal education, was indeed a detailed account of Eleanor's extended operations, a network of horror that stretched far beyond the walls of Magnolia Estate. "It's worse than we thought," he murmured, turning pages filled with names, dates, and locations. She wasn't just experimenting at the estate. She had satellite operations across 3 states. Mary read over his shoulder, her face paling. "This changes everything. She's not just fleeing to start over, she's relocating to an existing operation." The doctor nodded grimly. "The Missouri property isn't new. According to Daniel's notes, Eleanor purchased it 5 years ago through intermediaries. It's been operational for at least 3 years." Abigail's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we have even less time than we thought. If she's joining an established site, she could resume her work immediately." As the afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the garden, the 3 conspirators bent their heads together over Daniel's journal, formulating a plan that would take them into the heart of the Western Territories and directly into the path of Eleanor Hargrove's continuing legacy. What none of them noticed was the well-dressed man watching the house from across the street, his attention fixed on their porch discussion. When they finally moved inside as evening approached, he made a notation in a small notebook before walking unhurriedly toward the telegraph office. In New Orleans, Eleanor Hargrove sat in a private dining room of an exclusive hotel, sipping tea as she reviewed architectural drawings for her new Missouri estate. When a servant entered with a telegram, she accepted it with a thin smile that grew as she read the encoded message. "Is everything satisfactory, mistress?" asked the servant, a young woman whose subservient posture concealed watchful eyes. "Indeed, Rachel," Eleanor replied, placing the telegram in her pocket. "It seems our friend Dr. Woodward has received Daniel's little journal. The bait has been taken. Shall I inform Mr. Williams to prepare for visitors in Missouri?" Eleanor's smile deepened, revealing teeth that seemed unnaturally sharp in the candlelight. "Yes. Tell my son to make appropriate arrangements. We want our guests to receive a proper Hargrove welcome." As Rachel left to deliver the message, Eleanor returned to her architectural plans, adding annotations to a section labeled Underground Facilities, Phase 2. The Hargrove legacy would not only continue, but evolve, strengthened by the very opposition that sought to destroy it. In her private chambers upstairs, Sarah lay in drugged sleep, her swollen abdomen moving slightly as the child within, a child that Eleanor had personally designed through generations of selective breeding, shifted restlessly, as if sensing the darkness into which it would soon be born. The Matriarch of Tallahassee had lost her original estate, but her vision remained intact. The true horror of the Hargrove legacy was not in its past, but in its future, a future that was spreading its roots into new soil, even as those who opposed it believed they were closing in on victory. And somewhere in the vast American wilderness, more women like Sarah waited in chambers hidden from the light, their bodies vessels for Eleanor's grand design, a design spanning generations, creating bloodlines that would serve purposes only the Hargrove women fully understood.